I've always felt drawn to the forest. There's something about how the trees surround you, cutting you off from the world's constant noise. But this time, the woods felt off. They weren't inviting or free. They felt wrong. The uneasiness hit the moment we left the dirt road and pulled into the clearing. Max, our older golden retriever, was restless in the back seat before I even turned off the engine. Luna, usually the bold one, let out anxious whines. "Looks great, right?" I forced a grin at my wife, Emily. She nodded, though her furrowed brow betrayed her unease. Jake, our 8-year-old, hopped out of the car before I could say a word, clutching his small backpack. "It's like something from a movie," he shouted as Max bolted past him, barking at the treeline. "Mox," I called, and he stopped abruptly, his tail low, ears pinned back. Slowly, he crept back to us, sniffing the ground like something was out there. Put me on edge. Max was fearless, and seeing him spooked wasn't normal. We started setting up camp in the clearing, which was large enough for our tent, a fire pit, and some space for Jake to play. Surrounding it was a thick wall of trees. So thick it felt unnatural, as if the forest were pressing in on us. Emily must have felt it too because she kept glancing over her shoulder while unpacking. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly, pausing mid-step. I stopped and listened. Took me a moment to realize what was missing. The birds. There were no chirps, no rustling leaves, just the faint whisper of the wind through the pines. "It's just quiet out here," I said, though the words felt hollow. By the time we lit the fire that night, my unease hadn't faded. Max and Luna sat stiffly near the fire, their eyes locked on something beyond the glow. Jake, oblivious, laughed as he roasted marshmallows. Emily stared into the flames like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. It began with a single crack, a branch snapping in the distance. Max stood instantly, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A second crack followed, closer this time. Luna's hackles rose, and she joined Max in growling. "Probably a deer," I muttered, though my hand instinctively went to the rifle leaning against the tent. The sounds weren't like a deer's. They were deliberate, heavy. Whatever it was circled us, crunching leaves and snapping twigs, always staying just beyond the firelight. Max barked sharply, launching toward the darkness but stopping short, growling like he didn't dare go farther. "Stay back," I shouted into the shadows, hoping the noise would scare it off. Silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I didn't sleep that night. Every time the footsteps returned, I froze, praying it was just some animal. But by morning, I knew for certain we weren't alone. The morning brought no relief. If anything, the woods felt heavier in the daylight. The birds were still silent, the air stagnant, and Max and Luna hadn't relaxed. "Let's take a walk," Emily suggested, her smile strained. I agreed, anything to shake the tension. We followed a narrow path beyond the clearing, overgrown and easy to miss. Jake skipped ahead, unaware of the unease in the air. Max stayed close, his ears twitching at every sound. We hadn't gone far when Max froze and barked sharply before darting down the trail. "Max, come back," Emily called, panic in her voice. We all sprinted after him. When I caught up, Max was standing at the edge of another clearing, barking furiously at something I couldn't see. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, stepping closer. That's when I saw it. An abandoned campsite. A tent lay shredded on the ground. Its poles snapped. A cooler was tipped over, its sides crushed, and a camping stove lay bent and broken. It looked like a tornado had hit, but the surrounding trees were untouched. Could animals have done this? Emily whispered. "I don't know," I replied, scanning the area. Something caught my eye in the dirt. A small, muddy child's shoe, perfectly upright on a nearby stump, as if placed there intentionally. My stomach churned. "Let's go," I said, backing away. Back at camp, the woods felt darker, the silence more oppressive. Emily went to gather kindling, and Max bolted after her, barking at something unseen. "What happened?" I asked when she returned, pale and trembling. "I saw something," she whispered. "It was huge, crouched in the trees. Its eyes, they were glowing." Night fell too quickly, swallowing the clearing in darkness. The fire's glow barely pushed back the shadows. Max and Luna paced nervously, growling under their breath. Emily clutched Jake tightly. "I don't think we should stay another night," she whispered. I couldn't disagree. The snapping of branches began again, closer this time. Max growled, his fur bristling. I shouted into the trees, but the only response was a low, guttural growl. "Get to the car," I barked. We ran, Jake in Emily's arms, Max and Luna flanking us. Shadows moved between the trees, too fast and too large to be human. I started the truck as something slammed into its side, making it rock. I floored the gas, and we sped down the trail, the pounding of massive footsteps behind us. Only when we reached the main road did the pursuit stop. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, and no one spoke until the lights of town came into view. "Be careful in the woods," I finally said, my voice hoarse. "You never know what's out there." We were 4 days into what we thought would be the perfect getaway, a dream honeymoon in the deep wilderness. Just me, Lily, and our dog, Rex, a part husky mix with a streak of wildness. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, the nearest town hours away. No emails, no deadlines, just campfires, pine-scented air, and the profound silence of the remote Appalachian foothills. Lily had begun cleaning up the remains of dinner, some freeze-dried meal we both agreed tasted more like paper than food, when Rex let out a deep, guttural growl. My skin crawled at the sound. He was staring into the shadows beyond our campfire, his fur bristling, teeth bared. My immediate thought was a bear or maybe a coyote. We were far enough out for either to be a real possibility. "Rex, quiet," Lily said, though her voice wavered, betraying her unease. Her eyes darted to me, searching for reassurance I couldn't quite give. Before I could respond, a soft, almost musical voice floated out of the darkness. "Can I sit by your fire?" Lily startled, dropping the pan she'd been holding. Rex's growl escalated into a barking frenzy that echoed through the trees. My pulse quickened. The woman seemed to appear out of nowhere, standing just beyond the edge of the firelight. I hadn't heard her approach. No crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs. She was just there. Barefoot and still, her appearance was unsettling. Her mismatched clothes hung loosely on her frame, wrinkled and unkempt, as though she'd grabbed them blindly. Her dark, unwashed hair clung to her face in uneven strands. But it was her eyes that chilled me. They didn't focus on me, Lily, or even Rex, who was now lunging at the end of his leash. It was like she was looking through us, into some void only she could see. No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We were just about to call it a night." She didn't react right away. She swayed slightly, hands limp at her sides. I glanced at Lily, hoping she'd say something, but she was frozen. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. Rex lunged again, snapping his jaws, and the woman took a step back. "Your dog doesn't like me," she murmured to no one in particular. I tightened my grip on Rex's leash. "He's not usually like this," I lied. "He's just protective." The woman tilted her head, weighing my words. Then, without a sound, she turned and walked away, not toward the main trail, but deeper into the woods. The firelight couldn't follow her for long, but the faint sound of her footsteps brushing against the undergrowth lingered. For a long moment, we didn't speak. The silence pressed down like a heavy weight. Finally, Lily whispered, "Who was that?" "I don't know," I admitted, though I felt certain she wasn't just another camper. The next morning, the encounter felt surreal, like one of those disjointed dreams that lingers after waking. Lily was unusually quiet over breakfast, her gaze often straying toward the treeline. Even Rex seemed uneasy, pacing the campsite and whining softly. I volunteered to refill our water bottles at the pump a short walk from camp. The woods were unnervingly quiet, and most of the other campers still seemed to be asleep. As I approached the pump, I saw her again. She stood by a tree, barely 15 feet away, her posture rigid, her head tilted at that same unnatural angle. Her eyes, this time, locked onto me. "Hey," I managed to say, though my voice sounded less confident than I'd hoped. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and held out an object. It was a small, rusted key, its edges scratched and worn. "You dropped this," she said, her voice soft and sing-song. "I didn't drop anything," I replied, taking a step back. Her lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You'll need it later," she said, placing the key on the ground. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the woods. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity before picking up the key. It was cold and heavier than it looked, the smell of rust sharp in the air. When I returned to camp, I didn't tell Lily about the encounter or the key. Not yet. I wanted to understand what was happening first. By the 5th day, we decided to cut our trip short. The encounter had unsettled us too much to enjoy the wilderness anymore. But as we prepared to leave, we passed by the woman's supposed campsite. It was destroyed. Tent poles snapped, fabric shredded and hanging from branches, trash and clothing scattered everywhere. In the center of the mess was a ring of stones, each etched with strange, jagged marks that resembled runes. At the circle's center lay the same rusted key. My stomach twisted. I'd left it in my pocket the night before. How could it be here now? Lily tugged my arm, her voice low and shaky. "Can we go? Please." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Later, when we returned to the ranger station to report the incident, the ranger's face grew tense as I described the woman. "That site's been abandoned for a while," he said. Lily interrupted, insisting we'd seen her there, but the ranger seemed skeptical. The rest of the trip blurred into a haze of unease and dread. The woman reappeared once more at our campsite, her gaze sharper, more intense. And then there was the singing, that eerie, haunting melody that filled the night, surrounding us from every direction. By the time we left, I'd thrown the key into the woods, hoping to sever whatever strange connection she had to us. But even now, safe at home, the memory lingers. I don't think I'll ever feel at ease in the woods again. You know that feeling when you've been yearning for something for so long that, when it finally happens, it feels almost unreal? That's exactly how I felt as I parked my car on a narrow dirt patch near the edge of the woods. The cool, earthy scent of the forest greeted me the moment I opened the door, invigorating and sharp enough to make my fingers tingle in the brisk air. The city was far behind me, a distant memory now, and for the first time in weeks, I could truly exhale. I checked my gear one last time. A map, a compass, a lightweight sleeping bag, a compact tent, fire-starting tools, and a sturdy knife. Everything a solo hiker like me could need. This wasn't my first trip by any stretch. I loved wandering off the beaten path, finding secluded spots where solitude felt liberating instead of lonely. Out here, I wasn't dodging catcalls on busy streets or weaving through noisy crowds. Out here, I was in control. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden light as I started my hike, the trail barely more than a faint path likely trodden by deer. The woods were still and serene, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bird call to punctuate the silence. My mind drifted as I walked, soaking in the calm. That's probably why I almost missed the first odd thing. A snapped branch hanging at an unnatural angle just off the trail. The break was fresh, the wood inside pale and jagged. It looked like it had been broken deliberately, maybe by someone's hands. But who? No one else was supposed to be out here. I brushed it off. Probably an animal, a bear maybe, or even a moose. Still, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder a few times as I continued. By the time I found a spot to set up camp, the sun was dipping below the horizon. I chose a small clearing surrounded by tall, dense trees. Felt sheltered and perfect. With practiced efficiency, I pitched my tent, gathered kindling, and got a fire going just as the stars began to dot the darkening sky. Sitting back against my pack, I breathed deeply. This was what I'd come for. No deadlines, no noise, just me and nature. As I sat there, I chuckled at the thought of my city friends calling me reckless for doing this. "You're going to get eaten by a bear," one of them had joked. I'd rolled my eyes at the time, but now, sitting alone in the quiet night, the thought sent a small chill through me. It wasn't bears I feared, though. It was the silence, too absolute, too perfect. Normally, the forest at night is alive with sound. But tonight, nothing. Just the crackling fire and the steady thump of my own heartbeat. I told myself to relax. It was just my nerves. First night jitters, nothing more. Poking the fire, I watched the embers rise and flicker in the dark. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like I was being watched from somewhere in the shadows. Eventually, exhaustion won out and I managed to fall asleep. At some point in the night, I woke abruptly. A noise, a faint crunch, like footsteps on frosted leaves. My eyes flew open, my body rigid. I strained to listen, every muscle tense. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, and getting closer. Fumbling for my knife, I gripped it tightly, my fingers clumsy in the cold. The sound stopped. I held my breath, ears straining. Nothing, just the soft sigh of the wind through the trees. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. Forcing myself to relax, I tucked the knife under my makeshift pillow and tried to drift off again. But the unease lingered, gnawing at me. Felt like I wasn't alone. Morning brought a thick blanket of fog that muffled every sound. My fire had burned out, leaving only a circle of gray ash. Lying in my sleeping bag, I stared at the faint light filtering through the tent, replaying the crunching footsteps in my mind. I told myself again that it was just wildlife, but the thought sat heavy in my stomach. I packed up quickly, determined to shake the feeling. Fog like this would clear soon enough, and I planned to be back on the road by early afternoon. Solo camping is all about trusting yourself and staying calm. Panic gets you nowhere. But as I stepped out of the tent, that prickling sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and the trees, they seemed closer somehow, their dark trunks like silent watchers. I forced myself to focus on practical tasks, folding the tent, double-checking my map, and plotting my route back. But the woods felt wrong, too quiet. Even the faint drip of dew seemed unnaturally loud. As I started hiking, each crunch of my boots on the frozen ground sounded deafening. About a mile in, I stumbled into a clearing. My breath caught in my throat. In the center of the clearing was a deer, strung up by its hind legs from a low branch. Its belly had been split open, entrails piled neatly beneath it. The blood was fresh, glistening. Flies buzzed lazily around, but nothing else moved. I froze. Hunters, but no hunter would do this. The precision was too deliberate, ritualistic, And why leave it here exposed? It didn't make sense. My stomach turned as I took a step back, my boots crunching loudly. That's when I noticed the tracks.
Bootprints.
Large ones, leading away from the tree and into the dense underbrush. Whoever did this was still out here. I bolted, my pack bouncing heavily on my shoulders as I crashed through the underbrush. Branches clawed at my arms and face, but I didn't stop. When I finally did, gasping for breath, I realized I was lost. Everything looked the same in the fog. Desperately, I pulled out my compass. South. I just needed to head south to find the road. Then I heard it. The crunching. This time closer. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. I didn't wait. Clutching my knife, I ran. My legs burned. Lungs screamed. But I didn't stop until I saw the faint outline of the road through the trees. I stumbled onto the asphalt, collapsing in relief. My car was just ahead, its blue paint barely visible in the fog. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking, and locked myself inside the moment I climbed in. For a long time, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the empty road. Eventually, I started the car and drove straight to the nearest ranger station. The ranger, Officer Daniels, listened as I told him everything. He seemed skeptical but agreed to check it out. The next morning, he called me. "We found tracks," he said, his voice tight, "but it wasn't an animal. I never went back to those woods. Even now, I can't shake the memory of the deer, the boot prints, and the suffocating silence. Whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly where I'd been." Familiarity breeds complacency. That saying is my life summed up. For years, the trails at Blue Ridge Forest had been my escape. I knew every twist and turn, every incline and crag. But that night, the forest turned against me. It began like any other evening ride. I pushed myself further than usual, opting for the extended loop. The trail meandered through dense woods, and even as dusk fell, the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. By the time I decided to head back, night had fully set in. The moon, full and bright, illuminated the trail like a silver thread. Shadows stretched long and eerie across the ground, but I wasn't concerned. I knew this path so well I could navigate it blindfolded. As I pedaled deeper into the forest, though, an odd hush fell. The usual chorus of crickets and the rustle of small creatures faded, leaving only the crunch of my tires on dirt. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the cool night air had stilled the animals. But then I heard it. A sharp crack to my left, like a branch snapping under weight. I slowed, gripping the handlebars tightly, scanning the dark. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy, leaving the underbrush a wall of shadows. Probably a deer, I thought, or one of those wild boars that occasionally roamed the woods. Seeing nothing, I forced myself onward, but the sound stayed with me, nibbling at the edges of my confidence. Minutes later, just as my nerves began to settle, something hit me, hard. Pain flared in my thigh as I skidded to a stop, nearly toppling over. I looked down, expecting blood or some sign of injury, but there was nothing. Then I saw it, a rock, about the size of a fist, rolling lazily across the trail. Kids, I thought, some pranksters messing with late-night riders. But when I looked toward the ridges flanking the trail, I saw no movement, only more shifting shadows. Another rock followed, this one striking my bike's front wheel with a dull thud. My stomach tightened. I looked uphill, squinting into the darkness, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, a shadow distorted by the terrain. But then it moved. A hulking figure, broad and massive, stood on the ridge above me, its arms raised. Even from a distance, it looked wrong, its outline jagged and unnatural. Then it screamed. The sound tore through the silence, guttural and primal, reverberating off the trees. My mind scrambled for explanations, but none made sense. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. I pedaled hard. The trail became a blur beneath me as I raced toward the old wooden bridge that spanned Willow Creek. Behind me, I heard rocks slamming into the dirt, some close enough to make me flinch. The figure's scream echoed again, raw and relentless. As I neared the bridge, a shadow passed over the trail, and I glanced up just in time to see a boulder hurtling through the air. It landed in the creek with an earth-shaking splash, drenching the bridge in mist. I didn't stop pedaling until I broke free of the woods, emerging into the clearing near my neighborhood. My legs felt like jelly, my lungs burned, and my hands trembled on the handlebars. I abandoned my bike on the lawn and bolted inside, locking the door behind me. Even after the screams faded into the night, they echoed in my head, haunting me long after I collapsed into bed. The next day, I reported it to Dan, one of the senior forest rangers. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, always quick with a joke but serious when it mattered. I told him everything, the rocks, the scream, the figure on the ridge. He listened, but his skeptical smile told me he wasn't buying it. "Sounds like a bear to me," he said with a shrug. "They can get pretty loud if you startle them." "It wasn't a bear," I snapped. "Bears don't throw rocks." A week passed, and I avoided the trails, making excuses about being too busy. But I couldn't forget. The memory clung to me, vivid and unsettling. Then one morning, Dan showed up at my house, his usual grin replaced by a grim, tight-lipped expression. "You need to come with me," he said, gesturing to his truck. I hesitated. "Why?" He sighed. "Something happened near Willow Creek. You'll understand when you see it." The drive was silent, tension thick in the air. When we arrived at the ranger station, Dan explained. A couple camping near the creek had called for help after being attacked. Rocks, screaming, the works. When the rangers investigated, they found the culprit. Not a creature, but a man, naked, caked in mud, and wild-eyed. He had been living in the woods for weeks, convinced he was in a war zone. He had escaped from a nearby facility for veterans suffering from severe PTSD. My stomach turned as Dan described the man's traps. Pits lined with sharpened sticks, hidden beneath leaves. If I'd veered off the trail that night, but that wasn't the end. A few days later, the screams returned, louder, closer, and this time I wasn't the only one who heard them.